Welcome everyone. There are so many people. I like to have a little more individual hello for everyone, but just welcome. I'm Susan Egbert, and I am the director of the statewide MSW program, and I've been an ethics geek for quite a while. Maybe some of you have already attended some of the presentations that I've been able to do. I love this TCI mini conference, bringing together people around the state. And one very special person who's been my colleague for decades is Jan Thornton. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Jan and I'm a colleague in the social work program with Susan, and I am on the Price campus here in our state, in our statewide system. And I've actually been a social worker, I realized today, since 1998, which is 27 years. And I finally passed that mark where I can say I've now been in clinical practice for over 20 years as well. But all of that has been in rural social work. And so I'm hoping I can offer some meaningful contributions today in that context. And I'll just start out really quickly with the objectives we're going to cover today. I think today is really about staying ethically grounded while we navigate the world of social work and that emphasis on rural settings. So we're going to talk about things like compassion fatigue, burnout, secondary trauma. Then we're going to look at that slippery slope that we can fall into, talk a little bit about the unique challenges of rural practice. And then finally, we'll do a little bit of application, and I'll let Susan say a little bit more about that piece.
Yeah, so you can tell why Jan is here because she is incredibly credible around the rural, smaller community ethics issues, and that's a wonderful area of expertise. And I'm so excited to be sharing this with you. Also, at the same time, all of these concepts are obviously applicable in any setting. There's nothing here that isn't, that's going to create a problem if you follow these ethical tenets in an urban area. So the first thing, and some of you have been to entire presentations with me or myself and Sean Camp around this, but the idea that self-care in our field is an ethical obligation. And we talk a lot about compassion fatigue, and that's when we lose our ability to tolerate the strong emotions and difficult stories of others. We lose that sensitivity that brought us into the field, and we may find that we don't have the ability to care anymore. And burnout is another concept, physical and emotional exhaustion as a result of prolonged stress and frustration. We have it on our side, a depleted ability to cope with the work-life demands that we face. And we start feeling powerless to achieve our goals. Maybe lose sight of, again, what dream brought us into social work, what passions, things like that. And then we talk a lot in our program and other areas about secondary or vicarious trauma. And that's the idea that repeated exposure to the difficult stories and situations over time, our worldview actually changes. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that. I know the way I parent, the way everything has a lot to do with that. Okay, so there are some professional risks if we don't attend to self-care as an ethical obligation. We have terrible situations that our clients struggle with that we are a part of. The pressures and demands of those jobs and tight schedules, unrealistic expectations of ourselves, maybe our organization, maybe our communities, and a lack of positive feedback or support might add to this psychological and emotional load. And to compensate, we might become excessively dedicated, overly compulsive, perfectionistic, and have an unhealthy focus on the achievements of ourself and those we serve. And that's kind of the opposite, right, of the fatigue and the burnout and just distancing and letting go. We might engage at an even more intense level. And I love this. We teach out of a book called Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky and Connie Burke. And this is a cartoon from their book. And it's two rats, and they're both racing along. And then one just has an epiphany and sits down to rest. So that's very meaningful for a lot of us and something we want to encourage you to think about. There are some specific areas of the code. I did a couple tours of duty on the Doppel board many years ago, and I will say that every situation where we had a professional coming in on probation or losing their license, I can't think of an exception in which they were not attending to self-care or things had basically gotten away from them in managing their personal lives, their personal struggles, and then it kind of drifted into the professional realm. So I just want to emphasize this tenet, the standard around impairment. Social workers should not allow their own personal problems, psychosocial distress, legal problems, substance abuse, or mental health difficulties to interfere with their professional judgment and performance or to jeopardize the best interests of the people for whom they have a professional responsibility. And the other piece of that, which often becomes very difficult, is that we also have that responsibility for colleagues, right? To either assist, encourage, or make sure that they are serving in a most effective way. And then the other piece is just if we find ourselves in that situation, it's appropriate to seek consultation, take immediate action, get some help, make some adjustments in workload, even take a break from practice for a while, or take other steps necessary to protect clients and others who are vulnerable. And this is something I love from the Canadian mental health. It's a mental health continuum model. Kudos to Sean Camp for making this a lot, more visually awesome than it was. But just think about this. I think about green light, yellow light, red light. We know what our experiences and what our behavior and thoughts and moods are when we're healthy. And we also know maybe when we're not in the healthiest place. And this continuum is just a helpful model to think about that. I think we all would put our own checklist or bullet points under each of these, and just as a way of self-assessing, self-care, and our need to get help or support. So why do this ongoing self-assessment and management? It is an ethical obligation. We also hear the term from Vincent Folletti in the ACEs theorists that the body presents its bill. I will say the mind presents its bill. We have to take this seriously. And any of you who are old enough to know Lassie or remember her, she always hung out with a kid named Timmy. He was constantly getting in situations that were perilous, and she was always helping, always going to get help for Timmy. And eventually she got help for herself. So we need to maintain a high level of critical self-awareness, acknowledge those effects of trauma exposure and burnout. We often say it's impossible to walk through water and not get wet. It's also impossible to do this work and not feel and experience some of that trauma as we hold it with our clients. We need to make room for our own internal process and make space to heal. And then when we get into a situation of imbalance, we need to determine what we need to do to get back on track and commit to implementing changes. And just as we move into the focus kind of on the rural element, rural practitioners, just like rural, community members often lack immediate access to support networks, and that increases the need for proactive self-care. And I will say, also, being a rural practitioner, it's maybe hard to find someone when you need support that you don't know professionally or personally, right? So we'll talk a little bit about some strategies around that. All right, thank you.
Yeah. And sorry, everybody, for the flying slides. I keep bumping it and it's going backwards and forwards.
I keep it interesting. You'll note we're going to try to kind of hurry a little bit through this theoretical part because we really want to get down into the peer consultation, and we have some cases to talk about that'll help illustrate these points.
Yeah, so this particular graphic, and I'm actually going to throw it in the chat for everybody, but I came across this online, and thought it was so well done. And I actually made contact with the person who created it, Kate Kipp, and asked her permission to use it in our presentation today. But I think there's a couple of things I just really want to highlight here. One, I think you can see how each of these areas just makes sense in the rural context. We're more visible. That increases our risk of boundary crossings and dual relationships. And it also gives us a lot of complex issues with social media that we're going to talk about much later in the presentation. But if you look over at the end, you'll notice that it also says this very same things on self-care. And I think one of the unique things that happens, we know that to prevent these ethical issues, self-care is so important. But I think in the rural context, we can't forget that sometimes in the practice of our self-care, sometimes we bump up against those same ethical issues. So we go to the gym and we run into our clients, or we're at a community event and we're again bumping up against those issues, or maybe we post something on social media and suddenly we're in this unexpected interaction with our clients. So I think it's important to just realize that in rural areas, we have to be really intentional and aware so that even in caring for ourselves, we're still upholding the integrity of our role in these situations. So, and this slide introduces the concept as known as that slippery slope. And it's that idea that ethical violations often don't start with those big obvious breaches. They often begin with really small shifts in our thought and behavior, and we start to rationalize things that start to gradually erode our standards. I heard it said once as like the seemingly unimportant decisions that we make in our day-to-day. And Bandura called this process moral disengagement. And it's that kind of self-deception that allows us to justify actions that we know are questionable. And instead of feeling bad, we minimize our responsibilities, we blame the system, or we just even dehumanize those that are affected. And it's a subtle process where maybe we bend a boundary just a little because we're overworked, or we justify a confidentiality lapse as being for the client's good. And then because we feel okay about that first small action, the next questionable decision feels even easier, and we start to slide that slippery slope into an ethical violation. So a potential metaphor, I thought of like a hiker on a trail that just gradually gets off the trail, and before you know it, they're lost, right? And I think that's a good metaphor for this.
Yeah, so just to summarize, people are more likely to justify small ethical indiscretions than major ones. And this has been found in research. Over time, they just justify a little more and a little more. And then pretty soon, somehow the big indiscretions happen. And when faced with abrupt and large dilemmas, rather than that gradual increase, you would say, I would never do that, right? I would never sleep with a client. I would never take money to a client of my own. I would never, all kinds of different things that folks get in trouble for. I would never falsify my billing records, et cetera, et cetera. But little by little, again, that's the risk. They're more likely to make unethical choices if they're faced with these indiscretions gradually over time. And also, we have to think about this, those of you who are in administration or supervision, it can become a culture. When the lines gray, when, the things blur. And as leaders, I think it's really important that we hold that line.
Yeah, so again, this came from my interaction with Kate Kipp, but I loved this definition so much. It says the professional boundaries are defined as the space between a professional's power and the client's vulnerability. And just that sentence really hits home for me. But that power, the power of the professional comes from the position that we hold and the access to private knowledge about the client. And we hold it naturally through our role, our knowledge, the trust that our clients place in us. And if we use really clear boundaries, that ensures that we're using our position to empower our clients rather than intentionally or unintentionally exploiting them. There I go again, rolling the slides. So I keep bumping my mouse and it's just going crazy. So boundaries exist to protect both the client and the professional relationship. And we know that they aren't always black and white. So this slide breaks down some of the key distinctions between different types of boundaries. So healthy boundaries are really what we strive for. They're clear professional limits that prioritize our clients' well-being while upholding our ethical standards, respect and safety of our clients. Overlapping boundaries happen often in rural or tight-knit communities. So you might see a client at a community event or share some kind of a social connections. And while these situations aren't automatically unethical, they do require very careful awareness and management so we're not getting into any kind of role confusion. Boundary crossings are deviations from standard practice that may not necessarily be harmful, like maybe you accept a small gift from a client. But we have to ask ourselves, is this in the client's best interest or does it create potential risk for our clients? And I think we also have to consider if it might be a potential policy violation within the agencies where we're employed. So be really careful. And then boundary violations go beyond an occasional crossing. They are harmful to the client or to the professional relationship, can be through exploitation, favoritism, dual relationships. But these violations break trust and can lead to both ethical and legal consequences for us. And the key really is recognizing them in real time and making ethical decisions that keep the focus on the best interest of our clients. So just really quickly in the chat, and before we dive deeper, I would love to just take a moment and get some of your thoughts on what unique considerations should social workers in rural areas keep in mind? And maybe think about your own experiences or maybe hypothetical situations, kind of what makes rural practice different and what dilemmas arise because of that. Just take a minute to give people a second to think and hopefully share a couple of thoughts. Yeah, breaches of confidentiality, dual relationships, absolutely. Yeah, church and leading a session. Yeah, it's not always possible to avoid. Yeah, great comment, Jared. Yeah, bartering for payments. Oh, yes.
Bartering is so tricky and it's so against our code of ethics.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. These are great comments. So, yeah, family relationships, absolutely. And sorry, I'm going to keep blazing forward so we can get to our case studies, but
Great insights, everyone.
yes, thank you. So rural social work comes with unique ethical considerations. And I think one of the biggest is the reality of dual relationships. And in larger communities, avoiding those dual relationships is easier. But in rural areas, it's often unavoidable, like somebody mentioned that in the chat. So there are a number of different types of dual relationships, and they can mean different things for our practice. And I would even add one more to this list on the slide, and that's supervisory relationships, right? With multiple roles and loyalties and responsibilities and functions. And sometimes they're unavoidable, like they happen just due to the nature of small communities. We share small spaces with clients, we go to the grocery store, the gym, things like that. And they're not inherently unethical, but they do require clear boundaries and intentional management. Um, there's also kind of those planned or structured dual relationships that happen when we take on multiple roles in our communities. So maybe you're a board member for a local organization that also, maybe you're serving clients from that organization. And we just have to be transparent. We have to get clear consultation, have clear role distinctions to prevent conflicts of interest. And then ultimately, I think there are those potentially harmful dual relationships or clearly unethical dual relationships where things compromise care for our clients. They can create ethical dilemmas where we're not objective, we're not confidential. Maybe the power dynamics are problematic. If we get involved in those really clearly unethical things like exploitation or favoritism through like business deals, romantic relationships, or excessive social entanglements, clearly unethical. But I think in rural areas, the challenge isn't necessarily to avoid them all, but it's to know how to navigate them ethically to prevent falling into those harmful or unethical dual relationships. And, as we think about dual relationships in rural settings, and I think it's important to acknowledge that they don't just happen in person, but they happen online too. And social media and electronic communication have introduced new ethical dilemmas, sometimes in ways that we don't expect. And we have clear guidance from our code of ethics as social workers on how we should handle that online information about our clients. So the code makes it clear that just because information is online doesn't mean it's free for us to just access and use. And our clients have a right to privacy, even in those digital spaces. And engaging with clients through social media, whether it's friending, messaging, or commenting, is a boundary violation that can blur professional roles. And sometimes we do unintentionally come across information about our clients, and we don't mean to. Maybe we're tagged in a post, or there's a mutual connection, or some kind of a shared community group. And if that happens and we unintentionally see private information, we should stop gathering more information, be transparent with the client about what we've come across, and talk about the potential implications of that. And it matters because those online boundaries are just as important as the in-person ones. So again, we have to be intentional and ethical in that digital space to protect our clients and our own professional integrity. So that world has changed how we think about privacy and boundaries, but our ethics are still the same. And I would just say, I would recommend that your social media accounts are locked, that they're appropriate, that they're factual, and that if you're posting on public social media accounts, that again, you're appropriate, that you're factual, and that you're never posting client information. And remember that that's not a place to engage with our clients. So, and that piece of social media and technology just brings whole new layers of complexity. So social media can blur those lines between personal and professional life. It can amplify ethical risks. It can impact our confidentiality, sometimes in ways we don't even expect. And so in small communities, social media isn't just social, it's public, right? And people see it very, very quickly. And even a casual post or a comment can spread extremely quickly and unintentionally even breach confidentiality. So for us to maintain those professional boundaries, we should clearly separate our personal and professional online identities. And keep in mind that engaging in social media discussions with clients can blur those ethical lines. And just like in real life, online spaces create overlapping roles. So you might be part of the same community on a Facebook group, or they might follow you on social media, or they may even message you directly. I know when I had my private practice, and I have a Facebook that I haven't logged into for probably 7 years, but I know when I had my private practice, and one of the last times that I had logged in, I had probably 30 messages of people trying to connect and make appointments with me online. And so our clients try if our presence is there. I didn't respond, obviously. Also keep in mind that our digital footprint is so important to attend to. So your online behavior matters. And in rural areas, people notice. They notice our posts, they notice our likes, they notice our shares, and it can shape your professional reputation. So even if it seems personal, our clients and our colleagues might just see and interpret it differently. And keep in mind with ethical and legal considerations that our policies and our legal guidelines exist for a reason, and it's important that we stay informed about social media policies, what our code of ethics are saying, what our clients' rights are, and it's our job to stay informed and stay current on that. And public social media platforms should not be used for direct client engagement. And I'll say it over and over and over again. Even well-intentioned interactions can create risks there. And I even think something I was thinking about as I was preparing this is, even just the expectation that we're available to clients away from our office and away from our working hours, I think is even a potential risk. And um, in terms of digital literacy, not all clients in rural areas have equal access with our digital tools, and potentially maybe not equal understanding. So that can impact how information is shared and received. And we need to provide clear guidance on digital communication for ourselves and for our clients. I would recommend a social media informed consent or an online informed consent. And also, in terms of gossip, I think in small communities, social media can fuel rumors, it can fuel conflicts. And our ethical responsibility includes being mindful of online discussions that could be harmful to our clients or even to ourselves. And if we're intentional about boundaries and privacy and professionalism, we can navigate those spaces without compromising our clients or our ethical standards. So.
Thank you, Jan. I'm sure you all have examples. I mean, here I am in Salt Lake City, serving an adopted child who was adopted from El Salvador, who's a teen now. And I go to my brother-in-law's birthday party, and my brother-in-law's sister-in-law comes up and says to me, "You're serving my best friend's daughter. Thank you so much for all the help you've given them," which I haven't shared any information, but the best friend of the sister-in-law, I mean, we all have our small world stories, right? And social work seems to be an especially small world, no matter where we are. So I really appreciate Jan sharing that. What we need to do is work hard to manage that and actively work on making sure those boundaries are there. Boundaries aren't just about, the time. They can be about time. They can be about our mental headspace, how much energy we're spending on clients, how much the boundaries is a whole nother presentation, but I just want you to think about that. And the fact that you can slowly let out, the information, your guard, self-disclosure, whatever. But once your information is online, it is very hard to reel it back in. I have a regular practice of having my students Google themselves in class, and it is just a little bit kind of shocking sometimes to them. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I was looking at bikinis on Pinterest." That is not their intent. That clients or anyone can find that information about them. And trust me, they look things up because they're curious about us. They're investing a lot. They're wanting to know as they build their trust in us. So we operate, those of you who are alums, hopefully this is familiar, we utilize something called the ethic model. And this is adapted from Dr. Elaine Congress. And there's a citation there if you're interested. And what I just put in the chat, also that handout has it, so you don't have to worry about taking a picture. We have enough people here that we're going to have 20 groups. So your group assignment is also in the chat. You just pay attention to what your number is. Groups 1 through 5 will be case 1, 6 through 10, case 2. Hopefully that is clear. When you press enter on Zoom in a chat, it sends. So I was trying to use the semicolon effectively. So here are the steps that we'd like you to use. First, I want you to think about the relevant values, notably social work values, or if some of you are from our allied mental health disciplines, just think about the values involved and that create the dilemma, right? A dilemma means you don't have an easy answer. That's why it's a dilemma. So you have to kind of get into the weeds a little bit. Secondly, the T, think about relevant laws, policies, regulations, and code provisions. We don't know a lot in these scenarios that we put together about organizational policies, but so we're going to mostly operate out of like basic NASW code of ethics and also, anything you want to add or incorporate. And the H is for hypothesize about different consequences. So kind of like a decision tree, the what ifs, the what thens, what could possibly go wrong. That's one of my favorite sayings. And then I identify who will be helped and who will be harmed. And we have to keep in mind who is the most vulnerable. And we also have to keep in mind who are we serving, right? And C, consult with supervisors and other colleagues. So that's what you're going to do today is consult with colleagues on these cases. And I'm going to, Jan, have you started creating the breakout groups or I can?
I'm working on it right now.
Sweet. Okay. Uh, enjoy your time together. Take a moment also to just do a little bit, if you have a short, brief, concise little story that you could share representing some of these concerns. And then we will have you come back in about 10 to 12 minutes and we'll just really quick take turns processing these cases a little bit. All right? Enjoy. If you don't see something pop up to have you join, go ahead and just click on breakout room down on your bar little thing at the bottom, and it should tell you which one you're in. Looks like most people are finding their way to the breakout room. Let us know if you need help. Jan can see which one you've been randomly assigned to and help nudge you in there.
I think I'm supposed to be in room 20.
Awesome. Who said that?
Ashley Geary.
Ashley Geary.
Yes, you are room 20.
I just had to join by my phone because I didn't have a speaker on my work computer. So
We're happy to have you, Ashley.
thanks.
Okay, get you.
It has me assigned to a breakout, Jan, so we might, if you can undo that, maybe I can
Yeah, let me,
help
which
in
one are
other
you?
ways. It said room 5, just drag me out and unassign me. And Erin, do you want to pause the recording during this part?
Yeah,
Or do you
good thinking.
already? Jan will be fine. And I'm going to click close the rooms. Boop. Welcome back. I'm going to go ahead. Well, I guess people who aren't back yet won't receive the thing in the chat, but I'm going to post the cases, scenarios again. Most of you probably are not old enough to know the theme song to Welcome Back, Cotter, but it always plays in my mind when everyone's coming back. I see Derek nodding. You could sing it if you'd like. Welcome back. Anyway, last night in class, Sean and I were talking about something about in 2008 or 9, and people were putting in the chat that they were like 7 at that time. So I was like, okay, I'm officially old. It looks like everyone's back. All 98 of us. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and put the cases back in the chat. Make sure everyone has them, but they'll also be up here. So I do want to have just a little discussion. So hopefully we have some people who like to chat a little bit out loud. And this first case, Kim's a therapist and an agency supporting adult survivors of sexual abuse. I feel like this is kind of a classic in rural and less rural areas. So you can all go ahead and read it. Hopefully it's showing. How does this rural context impact confidentiality and risk assessment in this case? What steps should Kim take to address client and community safety? Anyone in groups 1 through 5, what are your thoughts about case 1? Did anyone think about case 1?
Yes, our group discussed it. Yeah, this is layered. Obviously, you picked some doozies for us to consider, and so our desire, obviously, as we talked about it, we want to be able to protect the client Angie while simultaneously being cognizant of an 11-year-old boy that is being potentially abused by this perpetrator. We discussed the fact that we don't know Angie's age. Even if she is an adult, it doesn't completely remove us from an obligation. So, as in all of these cases, it's really important to be consulting with peers in an appropriate level and setting, and then it is helpful in an agency or when we have access to legal counsel as well, so that we're making good decisions. We talked about how we'd like to be able to maintain a relationship with Angie in the process and the importance of protecting her. And so we went down a pathway of also discussing if we decide that it's appropriate to make the report. Hopefully we did our work up front with the client, informing them that we are mandated reporters if information comes forward, so that this doesn't catch them. That should be in our paperwork as well as in a verbal conversation at the beginning of treatment. And then bringing her into an awareness that that process is taking place. So those are some
Awesome. I think Rick froze.
things that and many other things in addition.
Thank you. Thank you. And we don't have time to process it all. We want your ideas. We want you to talk about, the process. No, it's a dilemma. All right. No wrong answers. Okay, go ahead, Jan. Let's talk about scenario 2. And that was perfect. We just have a couple minutes for each one. So Emma's a licensed therapist, and this is a Facebook story. Okay, groups 6 through 10. What, if anything, should Emma say to Sam about Facebook? What considerations are unique to digital interactions in rural communities? That's stuff Jan talked about. Who's got some thoughts on that?
Well, we talked about the fact that if you have a client who's trying to contact you and that kind of thing, giving them the opportunity to wait till the next appointment, have them come in and say, "Hey, listen, I got your message." And quickly and hard, fast rule. I don't connect socially with my clients, that kind of thing. And we actually talked about an issue that I had when my client first reached out to me on Facebook. I said, I don't socially interact with my clients. Sorry, no. And then I left the practice and I had to have my last appointment with her. So she knew I was leaving the practice. So she waited about a month and then messaged me again and said, "Now that you aren't my therapist anymore, can we be friends?" And I again said, no, I don't socially interact with my clients. And she contacted me a couple of other times to the point where I blocked her. And we talked about the fact that it's our ethical responsibility to toe that line. And so even if you're trying to send the message to your client and they're not getting it, then you take it a step further and make sure that it actually, the message is driven home all the way.
That's excellent. Thank you, Kelly. A couple things that you made me think of. One, we have to be the professional in the situation. It's us who understands the boundaries that need to happen, right? We're socialized, we're trained around that. Excellent.
We also, just touching on the comments on the profile picture, we said, depending on the nature of those comments, there may need to be different kinds of conversations too about what those comments were. So just, again, not just let that go. If if it needs to be addressed, then address it.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. Case scenario 3. All right. Who groups 11 through 15? How would you respond to Joy's leaving therapy distressed? How would you mitigate the challenge of this dual relationship on an ongoing basis?
I think the first thing we discussed was let her have her space, calm down, leave if she needs to, and then follow up at that point.
Excellent. Other thoughts? Other groups?
We also did have a question about the second question about how to mitigate the challenge of that dual relationship on an ongoing basis. We're not going to stop having families, and in a small community, we're going to continue to run into people. So maybe a little bit of discussion about how we handle those social interactions with clients when they first initiate treatment.
Yeah. I think similar to the one, case 1, where people talked about establishing the mandatory reporting thing. I think in every environment, we have to determine how, with a client that we have the potential of seeing, how we're going to address those things, kind of a preventative, right?
So yeah, and we talked about how like in my practice in particular, we will see people out in the community. So we talk about how in every group we say, hey, as a reminder, if you come in, if you come in contact with us in the community, we are not going to initiate conversation, and that is for your protection and your privacy. And then we explain that because most of our guys don't know that.
Mhm. Excellent. And I know I've worked with students in more rural areas, and they have to even like train their children on what to do, like client approaches in the grocery store. What do the kids do? Where will I meet you? How will we address this? Yeah. Okay. Case 4, we have exactly 2 minutes. Wonderful. Should Alex talk to their manager about Michelle's problem? This is a case of colleague impairment, right? And how can this ethic model be applied to the situation to support this decision-making process? Group 16 through 20.
We brought up the codes of ethic with NASW and social workers. And we talked about maybe we don't have enough information, but we're hopeful that it has not impacted clients directly. And so with keeping Alex and Michelle's relationship, Alex can just keep chatting with Michelle and, getting her the support she needs to make the changes rather than going directly above her to her supervisor or affecting, legal fees. Because as of yet, we don't have the information that it's impacting, but just on a personal level.
Good thinking. Others? Okay. Jan and I really appreciate your engagement in this activity. I think that it's easy to say, oh, here's how you make a decision, here's a map. But until we face these very difficult situations, which risk our relationship with our clients, almost all of these, right? They also risk our professional reputation and our effectiveness. Until we think about some of these things, it's hard to really go through that process, and really appreciate your engagement and support of each other doing this activity. Jan, final thoughts as we wrap up? This has gone quickly. Hope you've
Yeah, no, I just thank you so much, everybody, for your participation and your thoughts on our presentation.